an India Today exclusive. One of the most important postings for India or Indian diplomats abroad is Washington, D.C. Key collaborations, important partnership. I'm being joined by India's envoy to the United States of America, Ambassador Taranjit Singh Sandhu. Ambassador, welcome to India Today, and many thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin with the most important aspect. That's the partnership amplifier today, which is health cooperation between India and the United States of America. Now, we have seen in the recent past, India really stand by America. But in your appreciation, do you think Washington has done the same with India during the pandemic?
See, Geeta, US is an important partner for India, especially in the healthcare. There has been a long-standing cooperation between our two countries. In fact, in the current pandemic, it has been a source of strength for both. Refer to President Biden conveying that US will stand shoulder to shoulder with India during this time. And I will only outline the facts of what US has said and done during this current phase, and I leave it to you to make an assessment. Let's first take the administration. On 26th April, President Biden picked up the phone and called Prime Minister Modi, and he committed emergency assistance, including oxygen-related supplies, vaccine raw materials, medicines to India. This was further underlined by Secretary Blinken and NSA Sullivan in their conversations with EM and NSA. Now, within 2 days after the call, 2 US Air Force aircraft airlifted COVID-19 relief supplies to India. And subsequently, it was followed by 5 more aircraft which landed in India with emergency supplies. The US government's commitment has been more than $100 million US. The state governments like California and New York, they have also come in. Another aspect which is important is that US redirected its own order of AstraZeneca manufacturing supplies to India, allowing our companies to produce COVID-19 vaccines. And most recently, US announced vaccines for India under its global allocation plan. And last month, US has announced support for temporary waiver of IP rights for COVID-19 vaccines, the proposal which we introduced along with South Africa at WTO. Now, besides the US government, there's always also been tremendous support from the US Congress, the private sector, American public. Now, in the US Congress, the embassy has been in continuous and sustained outreach with all the members. More than 150 members have issued statements, letters, tweets in support and solidarity with India. And these include the top senior members like Congressman Steny Hoyer, the majority leader, Congressman Jim Clyburn, Congresswoman Clark, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, she's the chairman of Appropriations Committee, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, she's the chairwoman of Financial Services Committee, Congressman Bernie Johnson, Congressman Frank Pallone, Adam Smith, Congressman Gregory Meeks, who's the chairman of House Foreign Relations Committee, Congressman Vela, who's the vice chair of Democratic National Committee. Now, in addition, the Congressional Black Caucus, which is very influential, you have people like Congressman Denny Davis, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Karen Bass, Congresswoman Rochester, Asian American Caucus, Congresswoman Judy Chu, Grace Ming, Andy Kim, Hispanic Caucus, Congressman Castro, Congresswoman Sanchez, Congressman Gomez, Progressive Caucus, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Congresswoman Jan Shakovsky, Congressman McGaughan, Congresswoman Frankel. So all in all, we have got support from the US across the spectrum.
Well, a very impressive, important, and a long list and high-level engagement between the two sides, Ambassador. And you touched upon some very important points. Let's begin with vaccine doses. Now, there have been some major White House announcements on global distribution of vaccines, but particular amounts have not been really given or spelled out. Is there any information regarding how many doses will come to India as part of that global distribution project or program?
So see, there has been a global allocation plan for initially 25 million vaccine doses. And India will get vaccines both through COVAX as well as those earmarked for US neighbors and partner countries. And President Biden named 4 of them specifically. That included Korea, Canada, Mexico, and India. Now, under these, apparently for COVAX, there are about 7 million and 6 million for neighbors and partners. India will also get vaccines from 500 million Pfizer vaccine announcement, which has just very recently come. This will be about 200 million doses, which will be delivered by end of the year, and remaining 300 million in the first half of 2022. Now, the process of distributing this is on, and you are also aware that India, the process of approving the vaccines is also underway.
But no specific number in terms of a total number. That is not spelled out yet.
As I mentioned to you that India figures in all these lists. Right now, they are in process of distributing amongst all the countries. And I've also underlined to you that the process is on in India for approving the vaccines.
The other very important aspect, Ambassador Sandhu, that you spoke about is removal of DPA priority ratings and allowing AstraZeneca now to source from the United States of America or US companies. But there is a huge question that a lot of people have been asking, and that has to do with whether if Covaxin will benefit out of it. Bharat Biotech also needs, although they say their dependence is much less now, but they do need some of the sources. So is there anything in terms of sourcing of these components once they increase capacity that they would also be able to look at those US companies?
So again, let's look at the facts. As soon as we received the requirement from Indian pharma companies, we have immediately been taking up with our interlocutors in the US administration. Now, on this, External Affairs Minister spoke to Secretary of State Blinken. We have been also in touch with NSA Sullivan. We have also spoken to White House Coordinator Jeff Zients, the Deputy Secretary of State Sherman, State Coordinator Giles Smith, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, etc., etc. Now, of course, we welcome the announcement of the US removing DPA ratings for AstraZeneca and Novavax. We have also been consistently engaging all the major supply chain companies. And, these include Sitwa, Antilia, Pal Corporation, etc. I have personally spoken to them, and response from all these companies has been very positive. They have recognized the urgency of the situation, and they have been prioritizing Indian orders. And going forward, I am hopeful that they will be easing off the situation on the supply chain front. And already our production has been ramped up, and that itself is a reflection of the fact that these problems are tiding over.
Well, but the fact that EUA was rejected for Covaxin. Now, what are the implications of FDA rejecting emergency use authorization for Covaxin when it comes to, again, sourcing, or for that matter, even procuring items from the United States of America, where a large population in India have been vaccinated with Covaxin. So, and to go through the rigmarole of getting absolute proper clearances from the United States of America and not being allowed EUA. According to you, what could the implications really be, Ambassador?
I think we need to get the facts right. Firstly, emergency approval is for the domestic utilization. Ocugen, that is Bharat Biotech's partner, was in discussions with FDA, but had not filed for an emergency use authorization for Covaxin. Now, in view of the current local situation, the FDA has made a determination that no new EUA request will be processed. The FDA then advised Ocugen to pursue biologics license application, that is BLA for Covaxin. Now, this process has been adopted under normal circumstances for all the other companies which have filed in. Now, Ocugen is pursuing this process and is awaiting for appropriate practical and test data. I myself visited Ocugen facilities in Philadelphia last week and held discussions with its board members. Look, I'm not a technical person. However, what Ocugen has told me that the strength of their vaccine against broad spectrum of current and future variants, which includes the Delta variant, and Ocugen is confident that the vaccine could be provided for children too. And therefore, Ocugen is proposing to submit relevant data to FDA. And this could present global opportunity for Covaxin.
Vaccine nationalism, Ambassador, is a term that has become a very important, a key term to understand what not to do with vaccination and vaccine programs across the globe. We've seen vaccine method, we've seen vaccine diplomacy, and we've seen the entire grind. How do you see India and the United States of America work towards and cooperate on affordable, accessible vaccine?
See, global challenges like COVID require collective action. And affordable healthcare, as you have mentioned, is a priority not only for India, United States, but also rest of the world. And given our manufacturing strengths in pharma sector, the India-US Healthcare Partnership holds immense potential for mutually beneficial cooperation. Let me give you one example. You may have heard of rotavirus vaccine. This was against diarrhea in children. This was developed some years ago under India-US Vaccine Action Program. And incidentally, this was developed by Bharat Biotech. And you won't believe that the prices dropped dramatically when India started manufacturing it. So in COVID-19 pandemic, Indian and US scientists and institutions have been actively exchanging information, supply of medicines, medical supplies during the initial days of the outbreak. And Indian vaccine companies have collaborated with US-based agencies to jointly develop and produce the vaccines. There are 6 such vaccine candidates, and India and US are also part of the Quad Vaccine Initiative. These all will come together. They will enhance production, make vaccines more accessible, and as you said, it will make them more affordable.
We'll speak about the Quad cooperation, but coming to an important point that you'd made in your initial remarks, which has to do with the India-South Africa proposal. And now, because we're talking affordable vaccines, the TRIPS waiver to COVID vaccine is very important, and we see US's support on that. But the India-South Africa proposal is beyond just vaccine. It has to do with all COVID-related interventions. Do we see or can we expect the United States of America to support this proposal, to support India on other fronts in intellectual property rights waiver when it comes to COVID-related or health-related interventions?
See, you have to first look at this one. It is true that India received strong support from various constituencies within the United States for the TRIPS waiver proposal, which was brought forward by both India and South Africa. Do keep in mind, this was the first time such a support had come. And United States Congress has been quite vocal in our favor on this issue. And we have been engaging the US Congress along with the South African ambassador and the Kenyan ambassador. I've been speaking to a number of leading lights in the US Congress, and that includes Bernie Sanders, that includes Elizabeth Warren, Baldwin, Sherrod Brown, Chris Murphy, Merkley, Ed Murkey, Chris Van Hollen, Warnock, etc. you'll also be aware that 108 congresspersons led by Jan Shakovsky, and that included several progressive caucus members, they came together and wrote a letter to President Biden. We have also been in touch with other key interlocutors in the US administration, and that includes USTR Ambassador Tai, that includes Jeff Zients, the White House coordinator, that includes the State Department Syrian officials, and also Dr. Fauci, Dr. Walensky, Dr. Vivek Murthy. Now, what I want to mention to you is that with all these interlocutors, along with the South African ambassador, we have underlined that this is a process. This just not relates only to vaccines, but it also relates to other COVID medicines, especially for affordable medicines in the future. And I can tell you that most of these constituencies here have been very supportive. So it's a work in progress. We will continue in that process.
There have been a number of high-level engagements between the two sides, and you have been speaking, you spoke about it, whether it is President Biden, Vice President Harris, or for that matter, the ministerial levels between External Affairs Minister and his counterpart and the National Security Advisor. And most of them have spoken, if any, have spoken to Prime Minister Modi. There have been invitations that have been extended on both sides. Now, can we expect Prime Minister Modi's visit this year after the Biden administration has taken over? Is there any conversation on a visit front by Prime Minister Narendra Modi later this year to America?
Let's just take the period of the Biden administration. As you are aware that there have been very high-level political exchanges. Prime Minister Modi has spoken to President Biden 3 times since Biden's election. Prime Minister participated in the Quad Virtual Leaders Summit and also in the Leaders Summit on climate change. You are aware EM visited the United States last month and met all the key interlocutors. And prior to that, EM had met Secretary Blinken at G7 Foreign Ministers meeting. Secretary Austin and Special Envoy Kerry both have visited India. The Commerce Minister has spoken to his counterpart. Other cabinet members, finance, energy, health, they have all spoken to their counterparts. Of course, NSA has been in touch with his counterpart here. At the Quad Virtual Leaders Summit in March this year, there was a clear decision that leaders will hold an in-person summit by end of 2021. And to your second question, Prime Minister has had a warm and a productive conversation with Vice President Harris, during which he invited the Vice President to visit India soon after the normalization of global health situation.
We've seen all leaders, particularly the Indian side, Prime Minister Modi, emphasize on that aspect when it comes to any cooperation, be it Quad or for that matter G7, where again he spoke about it, is supply chain resilience. We know which country it's directed to or towards. It's vis-a-vis China. The fact that this pandemic, Ambassador, has shown the world that there needs to be alternative supply chains, else the global economy takes a massive hit. On that front, on creating supply chain alternatives, what's the kind of cooperation that we can expect between the two sides, also in terms of conversations that the two sides are having with other countries?
Look, you will agree with me that contemporary challenges of our times can only be resolved through collective action. And in that, the virtual Quad summit, which I mentioned earlier, the leaders laid out a positive and practical area of cooperation. Now, India, for example, has a talented human resource pool, particularly in STEM areas, significant R&D capabilities. Now, other countries have the financial and existing technology capabilities. Now, Quad particularly tries to use all 4 with their speciality and come together with the existing strength. And that's the perfect example. In fact, the Prime Minister was very clear at the summit. He said, Quad will be a force of global good. Now, it is not targeted against country X or Y. As I have said, the pandemic has clearly demonstrated the vulnerabilities in our supply chains. And therefore, all Quad countries are facing these supply chain constraints. And therefore, it is natural for them to come together and pool their resources. And that's going to be one of the important efforts. On our part, as you are aware, that we have made efforts by introducing bold reforms in India, including the PLI schemes for several sectors. Now, India is one of the few countries that has introduced economic reforms even during the pandemic. And these will help the supply chain issues because they are also linked to the technology capabilities and the standards. And therefore, coming together and going forward, the like-minded countries have an important role to ensure that in times of crisis, our supply chains remain resilient and trustworthy. And this is, of course, a work in progress.
Well, a very important last answer, Ambassador. You're saying that any decision of the global community is not directed against one country or the other, that like-minded countries have to come together, but resilience is key. Thank you so much for joining us here on India Today.
Thank you. Thank you, Geeta.